Follow every rule or don't come. I read the subject line of the email twice, assuming it was a prank. It wasn't. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, watching the morning light hit the old oak cabinets my late husband Arthur had built. I am 64 years old. My name is Yvonne. For 35 years, Arthur and I ran a local auto repair shop. We didn't have a fancy life, but we had a good one. When he passed away 3 years ago, he left me perfectly comfortable. We had paid for our daughter Rachel's college in full. I was currently paying for half of her wedding. I clicked open the email. Rachel was marrying a man named Greg, whose family owned a string of car dealerships. Greg wore expensive watches and always looked at my house like it was something he needed to wipe off his shoe. I had tried to ignore it, telling myself Rachel loved him. But as I scrolled through the attachment, a PDF titled Wedding Guidelines for the Bride's Family, a cold clarity washed over me. There were 20 rules. Rule number 4 dictated that I was to wear a specific dull beige dress that Greg's mother had selected so I wouldn't clash with their family photos. Rule number 7 explicitly stated, do not mention Dad's repair shop to Greg's relatives. Tell them he was in automotive logistics. Rule number 12 demanded I sit quietly at my assigned table and not initiate conversation with Greg's parents. But it was rule number 20 that made my coffee taste like ash. The $40,000 house down payment check must be presented in a large envelope during the 8 p.m. toast so the photographer can capture the moment. I didn't cry. I didn't reach for the phone to scream at her. Crying is for when you lose something valuable. I just felt a deep, hollow realization that the daughter I raised was gone. I set my phone down, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account. The wedding was in 2 weeks. It was time to make some adjustments. I had put my credit card on file with the wedding venue to cover the catering balance. It was an $18,000 bill due that very afternoon. Rachel and Greg had chosen a country club with crystal chandeliers and a menu that included duck confit, something neither of them even liked. I had agreed to pay it because that is what mothers do. They help. But mothers do not sponsor their own disrespect. I found the caterer's number and dialed. A cheerful coordinator named Stephanie answered. I kept my voice perfectly level. Stephanie, this is Yvonne. I need to remove my credit card from the file for Rachel's wedding. I will not be covering the final catering balance. There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end. Oh. Are you sure, ma'am, the balance is due today, or we can't secure the ingredients? I am sure, I replied. Rachel has taken full control of the wedding logistics. You will need to contact her for the payment. I hung up, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and went out to the garden to water my hydrangeas. Exactly 45 minutes later, my phone started ringing. It was Rachel. I let it ring. She called 3 more times before I finally swiped to answer. Mom, she shrieked, her voice frantic. The venue just called me. They said your card was pulled. My credit card maxed out just paying for the flowers, and Greg's parents refused to pay for the food. I pinched a dead leaf off a hydrangea bush. I read your rulebook, Rachel. Rule number 2 said you and Greg are the sole directors of all vendor contracts and finances to ensure your vision is protected. I am just following the rules and stepping back. That rule was about the centerpieces, not the money, she stammered. Money is part of the vision, I said calmly. I'm sure Greg's automotive logistics background can help you sort it out. I ended the call. The first string was cut, and I felt lighter than I had in months. But Greg was not going to let this go easily. My older son, Ben, came over that evening. Ben is 32, a middle school math teacher, and the kind of man who looks you in the eye when he speaks. He walked into the kitchen, tossed a printed copy of Rachel's email onto the counter, and shook his head. Tell me you aren't going to this circus? Mom, Ben muttered, leaning against the fridge. Rule 7. hiding what Dad did for a living. Dad worked 50 hours a week so she could afford that fancy out-of-state college. "I'm going, Ben," I answered, wiping down the counter. "I just won't be participating the way she expects." Right then, the front door opened. Rachel and Greg walked in without knocking. Greg looked furious, his face flushed. He was wearing a designer polo shirt standing in my living room like an inspector looking for mold. Yvonne, Greg started entirely skipping a greeting. "Rachel had to take out a high-interest personal loan today to cover the catering. This is incredibly embarrassing for us." "It's only embarrassing if you talk about it," I replied, folding my dish towel. Rachel stepped forward holding a large garment bag. "Mom, please, let's not fight. Just, here. Greg's mother bought the dress for you. The beige one. It was $1,500, but she put it on her card. Just wear it. Follow the schedule and we can forget about the catering thing. We still need the down payment check for the house closing next week." She laid the garment bag on Arthur's old leather armchair. Greg eyed the chair with disgust. "You really should throw that old thing out, Yvonne. It smells like motor oil." I looked at the chair, then at Greg, and finally at Rachel. She didn't defend her father's memory. She just looked at the floor. "Take the dress back," I said. "I already have something to wear." "You can't," Rachel panicked. "Rule 4 does not apply to me," I interrupted. "I am a guest. Guests choose their own clothes. You can leave now." Ben stepped forward, opening the front door wide. They left in silence. The rehearsal dinner was hosted by Greg's parents at a downtown steakhouse. I drove myself arriving exactly on time. I did not wear beige. I wore a tailored dark navy suit that made me feel like armor. When I walked into the private dining room, the noise level dropped slightly. Greg's mother, a woman who wore too much perfume and jewelry that clanked when she moved, gave me a tight, artificial smile. "Yvonne, you made it. We weren't sure you'd fit in with this crowd." I managed just fine. I noted, taking my seat. Rachel had arranged the seating chart. Greg's family occupied the massive center table, laughing loudly, drinking expensive wine. Ben and I were placed at a small, two-top table near the kitchen doors, where the waiters rushed in and out with trays of dirty plates. It was the table you give to people you are obligated to invite, but prefer not to see. Ben gripped his fork tight enough to turn his knuckles white. "I'm going to go say something to her," he whispered, his jaw clenched. I put my hand over his. "Don't. Sit down, Ben. Never interrupt people when they are showing you exactly who they are." Throughout the 2-hour dinner, Rachel did not come to our table once. She was too busy laughing at Greg's father's jokes and posing for pictures. When it was time for toasts, Greg stood up and thanked his parents for their unwavering financial and emotional support. He didn't mention me. He didn't mention Arthur. I finished my sparkling water, placed my napkin on the table, and stood up. The dessert hadn't been served yet, but I had seen enough. "Where are you going?" Ben asked. "Home," I said quietly. "I have an envelope to prepare for tomorrow." Ben didn't argue. He just stood up, threw a $20 bill on the table for the waiter, and walked out with me. My house was quiet when I returned. I walked into the living room and sat in Arthur's leather armchair. It didn't smell like motor oil anymore, but if I closed my eyes, I could still imagine the weight of him sitting there after a long day at the shop. I missed him fiercely in that moment, but I was also glad he wasn't here to see what our daughter was doing. Rachel expected a grand presentation tomorrow at 8 p.m. She wanted me to stand up in front of the photographer and Greg's wealthy relatives, handing over a thick envelope containing a certified check for $40,000. It was the down payment for their new 4-bedroom house. I had promised it to them 6 months ago, back when I thought they were building a life together, not building a stage to perform on. I went to my desk in the hallway. I pulled out a crisp, heavy, ivory envelope. I didn't write a check. Instead, I opened my purse and took out a $100 bill and a $50 bill. I folded the $150 neatly. Next, I took the printed copy of Rachel's wedding guidelines for the bride's family. I took a red pen and drew a bold, clean circle around Rule 12, maintain a quiet, distant presence. Finally, I took a small piece of stationery and wrote exactly 3 sentences. I did not write out of anger. I wrote it with the cold, steady hand of a woman who was taking her life back. I slipped the cash, the rulebook, and the note into the ivory envelope and sealed it tight. I left it on the kitchen counter next to my car keys. I slept incredibly well that night, undisturbed by anxiety or guilt. Tomorrow, I would follow her rules to the letter. The wedding took place at 4 in the afternoon. The weather was unusually warm for October, the sun casting long golden shadows across the pristine lawns of the country club. I arrived with Ben. I wore the same navy blue dress I had worn to the rehearsal. It was elegant, comfortable, and most importantly, it was mine. When we walked into the ceremony space, a young woman with a clipboard immediately intercepted us. "Yvonne, you're in the 3rd row on the left." The first 2 rows were entirely filled with Greg's extended family. I took my seat in the 3rd row without a word. The music started. Rachel looked stunning in her gown, I will admit that. But as she walked down the aisle, her eyes scanned the crowd. When she saw me, her gaze snapped to my navy dress. A flash of pure irritation crossed her face before she plastered her smile back on for the cameras. The ceremony was quick and impersonal. Vows were read from custom-printed cards. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the crowd cheered. Ben leaned over to me as we stood up. "You doing okay, Mom?" he asked softly. "I'm perfectly fine, Ben," I replied, smoothing my skirt. And I was. The heavy, suffocating feeling of trying to please a daughter who was ashamed of me had completely vanished. We moved to the reception hall. It was spectacular, dripping with white florals and gold accents. As expected, my place card was at table 18, the farthest table in the room tucked right beside the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. I sat down, placed my purse on my lap, and watched the room. The show was about to begin, and I was exactly where Rachel had placed me out of sight. Dinner was served, though calling it dinner felt generous. It was a tiny piece of dry chicken and some asparagus. I ate quietly, watching the servers rush past my chair. Greg's parents were holding court at the head table, clinking glasses and accepting praise for the beautiful event. At 7:45 p.m., the band stopped playing. The MC, a man with too much hair gel, tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, the bride and groom would like to take a moment to acknowledge their families. If we could have the parents step forward near the gift table for a special presentation." Greg's parents walked up, beaming. Greg's father took the microphone and gave a 5-minute speech about how proud he was, casually dropping the fact that he had paid for the open bar and the floral arrangements. The crowd applauded politely. Then Rachel looked across the massive room directly at table 18. She caught my eye and gave a subtle, frantic nod toward the gift table. She tapped her wrist, signaling the time. The photographer adjusted his flash, aiming his lens at the spot where I was supposed to stand. I picked up my purse. I felt the thick ivory envelope inside. Ben looked at me, a tight, knowing smile on his face. "Show time," Ben muttered. I stood up. I didn't rush. I walked across the polished wooden floor of the ballroom, my steps measured and calm. I bypassed the microphone entirely. I didn't need to make a speech. I just walked straight up to where Rachel and Greg were standing, waiting with their perfect practice smiles. "Mom," Rachel whispered through her smile as I approached. "Just hand it to us and smile for the camera." Greg puffed out his chest, looking incredibly pleased with himself. I stopped in front of them. The photographer's flash went off, blinding me for a split second. I reached into my purse, pulled out the thick ivory envelope, and placed it directly into Rachel's hands. "Thank you, Mom." Rachel said loudly, ensuring the closest tables could hear. She couldn't resist the urge to check. She turned her back slightly to the cameras and tore open the seal. She reached inside, expecting to pull out a cashier's check for $40,000. Instead, her fingers pulled out the printed copy of her own rulebook. Her eyes darted to the red circle I had drawn around Rule 12. Then, the $150 in cash fell out into her palm. Lastly, she unfolded the small piece of stationery. I watched her eyes scan the 3 sentences I had written. I followed Rule 12 and acted like a distant guest. Distant guests do not fund mortgages. Here is $150 to cover the cost of my plate. Rachel's face went completely white. The color drained from her cheeks so fast she looked like she might faint. She looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. Greg, noticing her panic, leaned over to look at the note. His smug expression instantly collapsed into shock. I didn't wait for them to recover. I gave them both a polite, distant nod, exactly as a mere guest should. Then I turned around and walked back toward the exit. I hadn't even made it to the coat check when I heard the heavy, rapid footsteps behind me. Yvonne! Wait a minute, Greg hissed, grabbing my elbow. I stopped, looked down at his hand, and waited until he realized his mistake and let go. Rachel came rushing up behind him, clutching the ivory envelope to her chest. Her perfect bridal makeup looked stark against her pale skin. "Where is the down payment?" Rachel demanded, keeping her voice in a frantic whisper so the other guests wouldn't hear. "Mom, we close on the house on Tuesday. The money has to be in escrow on Monday morning." "I don't have it," I said calmly. "I canceled the cashier's check yesterday." "You can't do that." Greg snapped, his face turning red. "We relied on that money. You promised it to us." "I promised it to a daughter who respected her family," I replied, looking right into his arrogant eyes. "Not to a woman who hides her father's profession and treats her mother like a prop." "You wrote the rules, Rachel. You wanted me to be a silent spectator in your life. I am simply respecting your boundaries. You are on your own." "Mom, please, you're ruining my wedding." Rachel gasped, tears finally pooling in her eyes. "No, I'm just leaving it," I said. Ben appeared beside me, handing me my coat. He looked at his sister with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. "Have a good night, Rachel," Ben said quietly. We walked out through the heavy glass doors into the cool October air. The valet brought my car around. As we drove away from the country club, the silence in the car wasn't heavy or sad. It was the most peaceful quiet I had felt in a very long time. A few weeks passed. Without the $40,000 down payment, Rachel and Greg could not close on the 4-bedroom house. The deal fell through and they lost their earnest money. They ended up moving into a small rental apartment on the other side of town. Rachel tried to call me 3 days after the wedding. She acted as if nothing had happened, chatting about the honeymoon, before casually asking if I could just wire the money so they could salvage the house deal. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told her that my financial support had permanently ended, and I hung up the phone. She hasn't called back since. I took the $40,000 and did 2 things. First, I paid for a new roof for my house. Second, I booked a 2-week cruise to Alaska for Ben and myself. Arthur and I had always talked about going, but we never found the time. Yesterday, I spent the afternoon repainting my living room a warm, bright yellow. Arthur's leather armchair is still sitting right by the window. I sit in it every morning to drink my coffee. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty for ruining my daughter's big day. I tell them I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped pretending. When someone hands you a rule book on how to be treated poorly, you don't have to study it. You don't have to fight them over it. You just have to hand it back, close your checkbook, and walk out the door. The only closure you ever really need is the sound of your own front door locking behind you. If there is one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that the hardest boundaries to set are the ones with the people we love the most. For years, I thought being a good mother meant always saying yes, always smoothing things over, and always footing the bill. We are often taught that family means unconditional support, but I had to learn the hard way that unconditional love does not mean unconditional disrespect. You are allowed to protect your peace. It took me 64 years to truly realize that my presence and my support is a privilege, not an obligation. You don't have to argue or fight when someone shows you they don't value you. You just have to recognize your own worth and quietly step back. Once you do that, no rulebook in the world can ever make you feel small again. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today and letting me share my story. Have you ever had to draw a difficult boundary with a family member or someone close to you? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and it always moves me to see how much we all have in common. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own worth, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next. Until next time, stay strong, protect your peace, and take care of yourselves.